Thank you, Donald. Good evening, everybody. Well, there's no doubt about one thing. It's been LBC and Nick Ferrari's day. Perhaps you've been stuck in the office all day, working hard, and you haven't heard. But there was a remarkable interview that took place this morning on The Breakfast Show on LBC, where Diane Abbott struggled terribly with her basic arithmetic as to what it would cost to employ 10,000 new police officers. And it's been dominating the national news everywhere, all day. And a bit later on in the programme would analyse whether, in her defence after the interview, frankly, she was telling the truth or not. Plus, we'll also catch up at past on what the other parties have been up to today all around the country. I guess, given that the May Day bank holiday is out of the way, I guess in a way the general election proper has started today. And over the course of the next few weeks, I want to hear all of your opinions, and I promise you I will not attempt during this election period to impose mine upon you. I really won't. It'll be very difficult, but I promise I won't. But coming up first, you must have seen over the weekend that if you want to have a quiet, confidential dinner and you don't want the contents of it to be leaked to national newspapers, then don't invite Jean-Claude Juncker and the gang to Downing Street, because the weekend was dominated by him saying that Mrs May was living in a different galaxy, that the Brits simply didn't understand what the Brexit process was all about. But a new twist on this story emerged today. And I think the newspaper that had the best of it was indeed the Daily Telegraph. And the story is that basically the European Union want to block any deal on citizens' rights. And kind of bear in mind, there are 3 million plus EU migrant passport holders living permanently in the United Kingdom, and around about 1 million, it may be fewer, but around about 1 million UK nationals living in the European Union. And one of the easy things that I thought Mrs May kind of thought very quickly that we get sorted out is to agree some reciprocal rights based on history. And yet the Telegraph not only report the story that the EU want to stop this from happening, but they say in documents seen by this newspaper, we see that the EU had privately decided to block any deal, which I find to be remarkable. Well, fortunately, to back me up on this, I've got from the Daily Telegraph their deputy political editor, Stephen Swinford. Stephen, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
Well, I'm well, but I obviously am a pro-Brexiteer, and I'd kind of hoped for a long time that maybe common sense would prevail, given that they sell us a lot more than we sell them. But it doesn't look like it. Stephen, explain to me what these documents are that the Telegraph has seen that want to block any sensible deal for British people's rights living in the European Union.
Well, until now, Nigel, we've seen the EU trying to take a moral high ground on the issue of migrant rights. They've said it's all our fault, we're leaving the European Union, and we're using them as bargaining chips in negotiations. In fact, what we've learned over the weekend and this morning is that the opposite is true, that Theresa May has been trying to secure an early deal, as you say, and we discovered that there was a meeting at the European Council on April the 11th, which concluded that an early deal was not, in fact, feasible, that they couldn't do it. Now, they tried to keep this meeting under wraps. There were no minutes published of it. Nothing was known about it. We got hold of the minutes and ran them today, and these documents show that it is the European Union and not Britain that is blocking an early deal on migrant rights.
That in itself is pretty astonishing, isn't it? Because, as you say, they have been trying to, claim the high moral ground. How is it in the European Union's interests to start these negotiations off so badly that all it can lead to is a row and possibly the United Kingdom walking away from the table? Or is the timing of this, and this is my view, Steve, and I'm going to ask you what you think, is the timing of all of this something to do with an election that is taking place next Sunday in France?
You may well be right, and several people have been pointing out to us that the way that the European Union and Juncker's advisors appear to be behaving over this meeting is so destructive. It's as if they want to deliberately undermine Brexit negotiations, that they want to punish Britain, and this including over the issue, it seems, of migrant rights.
And is that because they're scared? Is that because they're scared that if Britain is seen to have been to be treated reasonably, that maybe Marine Le Pen's strategy of her own renegotiation, followed by a Frexit referendum, becomes somewhat more attractive?
Martin Selmayr, who is Jean-Claude Juncker's main advisor and many seen as one of the key figures behind this, is really worried about the prospect of other nations leaving the European Union.
Yeah.
And he has suggested that the prospect of Marine Le Pen getting elected would be a horror show, he said last year on Twitter. So I think you're right. The man himself has said it, and they have real concerns about it.
Yeah, well, I've no doubt about one thing, Stephen, that if whatever margin, if Macron wins on Sunday, they will claim it as a great victory for the European Union, whereas I think what I'm seeing is Euroscepticism growing absolutely everywhere. What does Theresa May, assuming she wins a large majority, what do you think Theresa May's negotiating position is with a large majority? Will she be able to come back and counter in a tougher way?
I think she will. I think she'll be able to go to the table and say, look, I have secured a very significant mandate. It will be at a time of uncertainty in two of the main members of the European Union, France and Germany, who have both got elections of their own. So you'll have Theresa sitting there saying, I have secured a mandate. You have to listen to my demands and you have to listen to what we want.
Terrific. Stephen Swinford, Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Telegraph, thank you very much for the inside story. Well, interesting, isn't it? Stephen Swinford making the point that it's the EU who've tried to claim the high moral ground, whilst all the while they've actually been trying to stop a reasonable reciprocal deal for, our nationals living in Europe and their nationals living in this country. And I wonder, you're listening to this show, you voted Remain. You may have thought over the years that the European project was all about peace and harmony and cooperation. And I just wonder, how do you feel when you hear a story like this? Does it change your opinion of the European Union? And if you think, well, actually, I think Juncker and co are behaving abominably, then you can call me on 0345 6060973. You may say it makes no difference because actually they're just playing games ahead of the French election, in which case you can text on 84850. Or you may say, no, I understand why they're doing this, and I think the European Union are right, in which case, using the hashtag Farage and LBC, you can tweet at LBC, and as ever, you can watch us on LBC's Facebook page live. I'm going to ask Dominic in Sidcup, what do you think about Mr Juncker and Mr Selmayr's behaviour?
I think Juncker's got good afternoon, Nigel.
Good afternoon.
I think they've got a stronger point in... He has a strong point. We need to have EU citizens coming for certain economies to flourish, and they also need to have us coming to them. It's trying to show a stronger hand in the Brexit talks and trying to sort of threaten us, like possibly Theresa May did at the beginning. I think she was kind of wrong to threaten Europe that they wouldn't be able to protect the European rights, where really she would be protecting them. Because
Well, what Theresa May... personally, Dominic, I thought Theresa May should have conceded this point and that we should have publicly claimed the high moral ground rather than privately. But she didn't do that. But thus far, the only even veiled threat that Theresa May has made in public is to say, look, unless we come to a good deal, then it may be more difficult to have sensible cooperation on counter-terrorism and security. And... the other way, we're being told there's a bill for 52 billion quid that they can't tell us where they've got the figures from. We're being told that we'll be blocked from having a trade deal. We're being told that even to contemplate a trade deal, we would have to conform to European rules for years to come. And we're being told we can't even enter into negotiations with other countries in the world. So it's pretty one way, Dominic, isn't it? Thus far.
I think that's more threatening. I think the talks haven't started, and that's the biggest thing. Currently, the only thing that's happened is over dinner, and no one really knows what went on over dinner. It wasn't publicised. So that's the big issue.
Well, it was... hang on. It was publicised.
It was publicised, but only in a more scandal way, in a more...
Yeah.
In the private. So it wasn't actually true. No one knows what they said. And the same way Theresa May is now saying, well, I don't remember hearing that being said, but I won't say no to it. So who's telling the truth?
There's always he said, she said, and I get that, and I understand that. But, didn't the fact that a German newspaper covered so much detail about that dinner, doesn't it show that actually no negotiations with these people are going to be conducted in good faith?
No, because they're both on the opposite side of the table. I think German newspapers haven't favoured you either much.
Well, I know that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm well aware of what the German media have said about me. Dominic, I'm just making the case that I think that, yeah, of course, there is give and take in any form of negotiation. And thus far, what we've seen from Juncker and the gang is sheer bull-headedness. Dominic, I thank you. I go to Trevor in Wembley. So, all these threats, Trevor, from the European Union, do they mean it or are they bluffing?
I think they mean it, actually. Although I can't be sure. You know, you have to take his word for it. You know, and I'm inclined to believe him, actually. You know, and because I really think Theresa May is just full of hot air.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. She's just bluffing, you know, because she's trying to secure a victory, obviously, at the upcoming general election. And at the same time, she wants to obviously convince everyone that she can get the best deal possible from the EU, but I don't think she can.
But the EU, Trevor, in their behaviour so far, you know, leaking private conversations, threatening the rights of citizens, giving us impossible bills to pay, which they can't justify. I mean, surely, actually, at the moment, we're the good guys, aren't we?
Yes and no. Yes and no. You know, I mean, I think it's really unfair the way the EU has been demonised, and I have to say, Nigel, actually, from UKIP especially.
Yeah. Well, I think
they were at the forefront of getting to leave the EU.
Yeah.
And I just think it's really unfair.
Well, one of the reasons, Trevor, I wanted to leave the EU is I know these people. I know how thoroughly dishonest they are. I know they're prepared to do anything to defend their failing political project.
Yeah, but you say dishonest. How can you say that, Nigel? That's a bit extreme, isn't it? Because, I'm sure there's a lot of dishonesty in this country.
Oh, of course there is, Trevor. And no country is perfect. But under our system of government, you can kick them out and replace them with somebody else. The point about the EU is the real power brokers are beyond the electorate. Mr Juncker was not put in place by the electorate and can't be removed. Trevor, I thank you. Well, in the face of the Brexit negotiations, the Daily Telegraph reveal they've seen secret documents that show that the EU have privately decided to block any deal to guarantee the rights of UK citizens living in the European Union and, of course, the reciprocity that would come for the over 3 million EU citizens living in our country. It is truly extraordinary when it was them, actually, that was accusing Theresa May of not being reasonable. And I've said already, they're asking for a fortune. They're trying to stop us reaching out to speak to other parts of the world. They want us after we've left to maintain all their rules. And worse than that, they've effectively given the Spanish a veto over Gibraltar. And worst of all, in my opinion, worst of all, the EU have indicated that if Northern Ireland were to opt to leave the United Kingdom and join up with ERA, there would be absolutely no problem in a new United Ireland virtually automatically becoming a member of the European Union. So what they are doing to try to make Brexit negotiations difficult for this government is they are prepared to stoke Irish nationalism and all that could come with that. I have to say, I think that perhaps is the most contemptible thing that I've heard so far. And Ant says to me on Twitter, he says, it seems that Juncker and the gang are taking Brexit seriously. We should just tell them to get stuffed and simply walk away. Well, that isn't actually what any of us wanted from the outset of this process, but goodness me, it's deteriorating pretty quickly. And in response to all of this, Theresa May, the Prime Minister, was forced to respond today, and this is what she said.
Now, during the Conservative Party leadership campaign, I was described by one of my colleagues as a bloody difficult woman. And I said at the time, the next person to find that out will be Jean-Claude Juncker. If you look at the guidelines that the EU has set out, they say in those guidelines that they want to see an early agreement with us on the whole question of the rights and status of EU citizens living here and UK citizens. I have always said that I want that to be dealt with at an early stage. I continue to say that. I said that in the Article 50 letter The European Union has responded in their guidelines by saying similarly that that should be an issue that we address at an early stage.
Is it remotely feasible?
The bloody difficult woman was a comment, I think, made by Ken Clarke, who was comparing, and then he said, well, we cope with Margaret Thatcher, I'm sure we can cope with her. Well, if Theresa May goes over there and behaves like Margaret Thatcher, maybe they will have a bit of a problem. But it does seem to me that the way the EU have behaved over the course of the last few weeks is they're virtually trying to make it impossible for any deal to happen. And I'm still going to stick with my theory, and my theory is they are petrified of Marine Le Pen's Frexit agenda following a renegotiation, and they will do anything they can between now and next Sunday to say that this is a prison that you're not allowed to leave. Maybe they'll become moderate and sensible afterwards. I don't know. Delightful SMS from John in Sevenoaks, who says, Farage, if UK... That's always a clue, isn't it? When they use surnames, it's always a clue. Farage, if UK citizens have a problem living in EU countries, you will be hunted down like a wild animal. Whether this is hate speech or not, I don't know. But John, thank you for being so absolutely mature and reasonable in terms of your political debate. I love it. Peter on Facebook suggests that the EU are not united on this issue. Well, I don't think the EU member states necessarily are, but I think the European Commission does appear to be. Sue says, I've never heard anything like the controversy Brexit has caused. What's going on? We voted to leave, so what's the problem? The problem is the deal. And Rob says, no deal is better than a Juncker deal. I'm going to ask Steve in Camden. You know, a lot of people voted Remain, believing this project to be a project of peace, friendship, something that would bring all the peoples of Europe together. And I wonder, are people going to be shocked by what they've heard today?
I think not. I think they're getting used to the kind of internecine start happening, and I would be surprised if Mrs. May doesn't pick up a few extra supporters through the fact that she's managing it in a fairly sensible way. And even though she's switched sides, or so it would appear, I'm not sure that a lot of people that voted for Remain weren't entirely convinced about either which way to go. I don't think it was a very clear cut. I think it was a 40, maybe a 30-70 thing that you could persuade yourself was 5-45 or 60-40. You know, it was not clear. There seemed to be so many advantages we'd got used to.
Yeah, but I mean, Steve, as I say, the point I'm making is that the pro-EU side talk about peace and love and harmony and us all being one big happy family, and yet the behaviour that we've seen from them over the last couple of weeks doesn't really indicate that, does it?
No, they're totally in denial, because I find that my continental friends think we're absolutely crackers. How can we possibly have the temerity to suggest that this thing should now be threatened by us leaving? And it will be, because we've been propping it up.
Yeah, well, we certainly have. Well, taxpayers' money certainly has, Steve. Steve, I thank you, Steve, for the call. And a point Steve makes there, which ironically is a very good one, is everything that Juncker has said, that the leaks in the newspapers have shown, that the Daily Telegraph story today shows, all of it can only help Mrs May in the election, not damage Mrs May. So I wonder whether, I wonder whether the European Union have got this strategy right, or is it just a question of they are so frightened of what Le Pen can do this Sunday? So I'm saying, folks, that actually the European Union is proving itself not to be a very nice organisation. If you disagree with that, call me on 0345 60 60 973. And I'm going to go to Valentine in Bromley. Valentine, were you a Remain voter?
Yes, I was a Remain voter, and the reason I voted to Remain, part of it was because I knew that the EU would not be bluffing come, this scenario whereby we're having to negotiate our exit. Their four principles of EU membership is key to their survival, and they wouldn't want any sort of deal that incentivised other EU nations to want to leave. So that they've almost had to stop taking.
Yeah.
And that's why they're being so stern with us. Now, Theresa May would know this going into these negotiations, and yet she will as you can see, she will say that, Brexit means Brexit. And, when she's speaking in the media, she will do anything she can to appear strong and win votes. But ultimately, the EU won't have a situation whereby we can get a better deal than the members inside. So it means that her negotiations are flawed. Nothing's going to happen. We ultimately will have a hard Brexit the way things are going. And that's only going to be a problem for the UK.
But, Valentine, you said they're being stern. I put it to you, they're being totally unreasonable.
Well, ultimately, they've got to survive as a political bloc, and their survival is ultimately threatened if we get a good deal. And we voted in the referendum politically and not economically, because common sense says that we will suffer some detriment, whether it's 3 years, whether it's 10 years, whether it's 20 years, but we will suffer. And many people...
Well, equally, Valentine, you could argue that common sense says that freeing yourself up to the 85% of the global economy that's not in the EU, you could be better off. I mean, you could argue that either way, couldn't you? But I do agree with you, Valentine, totally, that ultimately what we did was to take a political decision about our future. And I do agree with you that they are scared that us leaving could bring down the whole house of cards. And Valentine, I thank you for your call. It's interesting. The last time I was there in the European Parliament, all the talk was about Brussels. All the talk was about the European Union. Nothing about the member states at all. I wonder what Nick in Whitechapel makes of this.
Well, Nigel, I can't work out why you're so surprised. This is an organisation, and I did waver as to whether to vote to leave, and I came down the leave side in the end.
Yeah.
But an organisation that has always put its own survival and interests above the opportunities for its citizens. And you've got to look at Greece and Spain and Portugal to see that they have plunged those economies into dire problems to keep their own political project alive. And this is form. The EU always leak all this stuff about what happened at dinner and all the rest of it. So I'm not surprised that it's going on. And I agree with the last caller. In the end, no matter what they say, I really do believe they're going to want to punish us. The only upside, I don't know if you agree with this, is I think the individual governments, Poland and Spain, all the other countries, may have a slightly different view when their own lobbyists and special interests and unions get involved.
I agree with that, Nick. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think what the British government should be doing is launching a massive PR campaign right across Europe to people who make cars, manufacture wine, produce chocolate, to say, look, your politicians in the European Union are putting the interests of their failing project above your jobs and above your security. That, Nick, surely would work, wouldn't it?
Well, I think so, because at the end of the day, most people, we didn't naturally just vote on economics in this one, because I think there was actually a democratic deficit. That was what really stuck out for me.
Yes, but actually, but Nick, that is politics, isn't it? That is politics. That was part of our political decision. Nick, I thank you for your call. The EU puts its own interests first, but though I am asked on by text, Nigel, no one is asking the most important question. Will we still be able to compete in the Eurovision Song Contest? I certainly hope not. Mr Juncker and the gang in Brussels want to do everything they can to stop a reasonable deal being done for British citizens living in the EU and EU citizens living here. Whether this is really part of their long-term strategy, whether they're just trying to stop Le Pen on Sunday, remains to be seen. But the story that is dominating absolutely everything today was the interview with Diane Abbott this morning here in this very studio with Nick Ferrari. And there are many people out there describing this as one of the great election disasters. Others will be more generous, and I know that Diane Abbott since has been attempting to defend herself. With me is Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor. Tell us all.
When Diane met Nick may come to be one of the defining moments of this election, Nigel. Of course, Diane Abbott's car crash interview with Nick Ferrari this morning, which made most people want to hide behind the sofa and pull a cushion over their heads. To say it was cringeworthy, well, it doesn't do it justice.
If we recruit the 10,000 police men and women over a 4-year period, we believe it'll be about £300,000.
£300,000 for 10,000 police officers? What are you paying them?
No, I mean, sorry.
How much will they cost?
They will cost it will cost about £80 million.
About £80 million?
Yeah.
Theo, it can't get worse than this, can it?
That works out as new recruits being paid £8,000 a year, well below the minimum wage. Needless to say, Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, found himself inundated with questions just a few moments afterwards about his shadow Home Secretary during a visit to Southampton.
Diane Abbott was just on the radio earlier saying it would be 80 million. In fact, she got a bit confused saying 300,000, then 80 million, but you're saying it's 300 million.
She corrected the figure, and that's the figure, and it will be paid for by not going ahead with the cuts in capital gains tax.
And is it a bit embarrassing that your Shadow Home Secretary got the numbers wrong? You're obviously trying to get voters to put their trust in you in this election.
Not at all. We've corrected the figure, and it will be absolutely clear now, today, and in the manifesto. I'm not embarrassed in the slightest.
At lunchtime, Diane Abbott was back in the television studios, desperately trying to make amends. Her excuse, she'd done lots of interviews this morning and simply lost her footing under interrogation from Nick Ferrari.
I do know my figures, and as you will know, I did 7 interviews that morning, and that was the 7th, and I misspoke, but I do know my figures.
Now, was that true?
No. Diane Abbott did 5 proper interviews and 2 clips. You know, Nigel, you've been around the block in terms of media rounds,
sure.
That an interview is very different from a clip for bulletins and pre-recorded packages compared to, of course, a proper interview. What's more, her interview with LBC was, in fact, the 3rd of 5. Of course, the Tories have decided this evening to wade into the row. This is what the Prime Minister, Theresa May, had to say during a campaign event in Bristol.
Now, you mentioned the figures that Diane Abbott has used this morning. I mean, I think she was suggesting you could employ a police officer for £8,000 a head. I think she needs to go and have another look at her figures. But if I can just say this, I mean, people are laughing at this, but actually this is very serious. Diane Abbott wants to be Home Secretary in our country. I think that shows people yet again the very clear choice between the strong and stable leadership of a Conservative party in government and the coalition of chaos that would be under Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, I've got a wonderful Facebook message that Chris has just sent in. He says, I'm really rubbish at maths, but listening to Abbott, wow, I'm bloody Einstein. Given that this story has dominated absolutely everything today, can you please try and tell us on what I think is the first proper day of campaigning in the general election with that bank holiday out of the way? What else has been happening around the country?
Tim Farron was in Lewes, Sussex today. The seat was held by former Liberal Democrat Home Office Minister Norman Baker until he lost it 2 years ago to Maria Caulfield, the Tory. Mr Farron was joined by the party's candidate in the town, Kelly Marie Blundell, and the party's battle bus. The Tories have been focusing on the southwest. They currently hold all 6 seats in Devon and Cornwall, but they face a severe threat from the Liberal Democrats, and that's why the Prime Minister, Theresa May, has been there drinking tea and eating chips. Some people wondering about that combination, whether the two go together. A quiet day for UKIP, but tomorrow there's going to be a big important announcement from its leader, Paul Nuttall, on foreign aid. Britain currently spends 0.7% of its GDP on foreign aid, and I'm told that Paul Nuttall will announce that he plans to cut that requirement to 0.2%.
Theo, thank you very much indeed, and we've got 36 more days of this, so we'll see more of you. Thank you. It has been really quite an exciting day, depending on your perspective. I do genuinely wonder whether that may prove to be one of the biggest moments of the whole general election. But back to our conversation, back to the fact that despite trying to claim the high moral ground and saying beastly things about the British, all the way through this, there'd been a secret plan that the EU at this stage was not going to recognise the rights of up to 1 million British people living in European Union countries. And I'm asking you, particularly Remainers, I'm asking you, does this change your view of the European Union? They've always sold themselves as being about love and peace, but actually, in many ways, their behaviour doesn't justify that particularly. I'm going to ask Jackie in Winchmore. Jackie, what do you think about the EU's moves on this?
I think it's really, really bad. I just want to say that I just want to say that I want to thank you very much for everything that you've done, and it's a real pleasure to talk to you.
Well, maybe it's my fault, Jackie. They're being so rude about us,
I don't think so. I don't think so, because to me, I just feel that for the last 800 years, we've all our wars over Europe, we've never been that close to them. We've tried. Obviously, we can do so much with trade, etc., but there'll always be that little chip on the shoulder with them.
But Jackie, put yourself... I mean, Theresa May's responded, hasn't she, by saying, I'm going to be a bloody difficult woman, Juncker's going to find out. Do you think there comes a point in this where maybe the renegotiation becomes literally impossible because of their behaviour?
It could well do. It could well do. I could see that coming. They'll just make things go on and on and on, I think, indefinitely, as long as they can, and string things out and just be awkward all the time. That's the way I've always seen them, as not our particular friends. I know they're just across the border there, but...
So, Jackie, you're sort of saying leave at any cost, yeah? Whatever it is, let's just leave.
Yes.
Fine. You couldn't be clearer about that, Jackie. I thank you. I wonder what Adam in Leeds thinks about the EU
Nigel,
playing tough with us.
Good evening.
Good
Nigel,
evening.
Basically, you keep telling us that they need us more than we need them. Basically, that's wrong information. That's 500 million, 69 million. So, well, do the calculation. Okay, we send 55% of our trade to them.
No, we don't.
They're not scared from us.
No, we
They're
don't.
not scared from us. It took them 60 seconds to decide how they're going to deal with us, okay? And they have their plans ready for us, A, B, C, and D. Our government don't have any plan at all how they're going to deal with them.
Well, Adam, let's just make a couple of points, shall we? Number one, we're members of a club that we pay a net £10 billion a year into. OK, that's point number one. Point number two, they trade with us at a surplus, at a profit of about 80 billion sterling every year. You know, there was an argument made that if we weren't in the EU and all trade ceased, which of course is nonsense anyway, but all trade ceased, that maybe 3 million British people might lose their jobs. Well, in that case, about 5.5 million people in the EU might lose their jobs. And I think when it comes to cooperation on security and other issues like that, we put a lot more into the pot than we take out of it, and I jolly well hope we'll do the same after we've left the EU. So the point I'm making, Adam, is that in economic terms, we are a very, very good marketplace for them. Surely that's logical.
Yeah, we are a good market. But I'll tell you a fact. A German car maker like a BMW, they're not going to be scared if we're going to actually not going to have a deal with the European Union, because they can move their plant somewhere else. But we will still buy their cars, even if they put the price up for us, because they're the best car.
Well, actually, Adam, you've just made the argument. You've just made the argument for not needing trade deals at all. Because whether a tariff is 2% or in the case of a motor car, it could be 10%. You know, if people like a product and trust its price, they will buy it anyway. Adam, what I've been arguing the case for economic logic. But I do think that politically they're very, very scared of us indeed. And, you know, we've discussed this already this evening, but actually there are many there who believe that the European project matters more than the well-being of their citizens. How do you respond to that, Adam?
No, it's not. That's not the real fact, because if we go out from the club, so we're going to end up, the people we're going to end up paying more than we're actually paying now. So why do you want to have, after being in this club since 1948, you want to move now where it's going to cost you a lot of money to go out first, and it's going to cost us more money to buy our stuff from Europe anyway?
Because, Adam, I want to be a free democratic nation. But thank you very much for your call. On text I get, maybe Diane Abbott was ill today, but didn't want to repeat her recent disgraceful Craven performance, says Damien in Whitechapel. Never thought I'd agree with you, Nigel, but you're right. Juncker is insufferable. I was a pro-Remain unionist, but these elites cause Brexit. The contempt for democracy is awful. Let's just walk away from this disgraceful union. That's Interesting, isn't it? That somebody that was a Remainer now just thinks the whole thing's hopeless. Let's just walk. And I'm told on Twitter that if Europe unravels, it would lead to recession, a big recession, damaging living standards. Well, it might, and it might not. Well, just 2 weeks ago in the European Parliament, I said they were behaving like the mafia, and I was told off by the President of the Parliament, and I withdrew and said no gangsters, because they're giving us potential exit terms, that are completely and wholly unreasonable. And I'm asking you tonight, particularly if you were a Remain voter, whether you're shocked about this and whether it changes your view. But equally, leavers, of course, are welcome too. And I'm going to Steve, who comes from, I think, the most Eurosceptic constituency in the country of Clacton-on-Sea. Steve, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. Aren't you fed up with trying to educate people on the European rules?
Well, the funny thing is, Steve, there are no rules, because they make them up as they go along.
I know, because they do, yeah. Look, my main point is, obviously, this £50 billion, which is supposed to be a thing that they say we've got to have up front, where it's come from, we don't know. But can I ask you for your opinion? If it was another country that wasn't a net contributor, right?
Yep.
The most beneficial country, I think, is Poland. No disregard to Poland. But if they were to say we're leaving the European Union, would then the EU say, OK, well, if you're going to leave, we will give you 20 billion euros because you're leaving?
Yeah,
because we keep giving you money. This is the point I'm trying to make.
What, like a redundancy payment, you mean?
Exactly, yes.
I can't see it happening in a hurry, Steve.
No, I can't, but this is what I'm saying. So where do they get this 50 billion from? And to say that they're trying to stop other countries leaving the EU, why would these other countries want to leave the EU when they're giving them money hand over fist?
Because there's more to life than just getting money. There's more to life. You know, if someone bribes you to give away your liberty, your independence and your freedom, you're a fool to accept the money, in my opinion.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, and that's the point. Twice the other week, I asked Monsieur Barnier, who was the Commission's chief negotiator, twice I said, where does this figure of 52 billion come from? Hasn't it just been plucked out of the air? And all I got was a sort of little smile and no attempt to explain it whatsoever. But, Steve, let me tell you something. In 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be back in Strasbourg, in the European Parliament, sitting next to Mr Juncker, and I think I might just have one or two things to say. They are behaving utterly disgracefully, Steve.
Well, exactly. They're showing their true colours now, aren't they?
Well, you as a Leaver think that, but what I'm really interested in is what Remainers think, and I'm beginning, and I'm sure some, Steve, will vehemently disagree with you and disagree with me, but we're seeing some evidence tonight that actually Remainers are a bit shocked by this. Steve, I thank you very much for your call. I go to Andrew in Hounslow. Good evening.
OK, hello.
Hi.
I'm a Remainer.
Yes.
I'm still a Remainer. Ultimate respect for you, because you speak with charisma and you speak your mind, which is something what's lacking. I would say that principles are very expensive. And yes, we have principles as British people, which is good. But in this case, I think it's not perhaps the best course. I don't think the EU is scared. I think they're stunned. I think they want us to let us see what the possible implications of Brexit are. For example, the border, which is very easy to move from France to Britain, would see us swamped. They can impose extremely attractive deals for companies to leave us. Say, for example,
So, Andrew, hang on. So, are you saying these really are nasty people?
I don't think so. I think they're just stunned, and they wanted to see what the implications of antagonising them are. And we really need to look at it, the point that we're a smaller nation than the actual group itself, and we need to negotiate.
But I think, Andrew, you're actually making a very powerful argument for leaving. You're saying...
I don't think so, no.
Well, what effectively you're saying is that if any country has the temerity to say it wants to run its own affairs and not be part of this union, that they could do terrible things to them because they're big and we're small.
No, it's about markets. At the end of the day, we're employed by markets. We've seen the pound fall, which means which means inflation will rise in the short, the medium term to long term, which means interest rates will go up to combat that. That is something they're doing. My mother lives in the south of France. Mm. You know, she has the ultimate medical care, bless her, and the problem is that people are selling around her. British people are selling around her, and they're getting offers on the telephone without even seeing the property because they know the British are running scared.
Well, but they shouldn't be running scared. In a grown-up world, Andrew, they shouldn't be running scared. Do you know something? What we voted to do, Andrew, was we voted to leave political union. Not to completely cast Europe away. We want to be friends and neighbours. And I think the fact that Mr Juncker deliberately won't guarantee the rights of people like your mother, frankly, Andrew, I think it's disgraceful.
But this originated in our House of Commons, where we wouldn't sort of guarantee the people of the EU that are here. I have colleagues at work who are worried, which is horrific.
Well, Andrew, listen, let's for once believe the Prime Minister when she says that she wasn't going to guarantee the rights of EU citizens here unless it was part of a reciprocal deal, and given there are 3 times the number of EU citizens here, at least 3 times the number, than there are British citizens living abroad, what Mrs May was trying to be reasonable. Andrew, let me just ask you one last question. Do you think their behaviour is reasonable and fair?
I think what they're trying to show us is the implications of our actions, antagonising to a certain degree when we're meant to be in negotiation, but also the fact that they could move the border is just, to me, abhorrent. I mean, I've driven to France loads of times.
Well, we could control our border, Andrew, couldn't we?
Not if people are waving them onto ferries and people like that. And I have nothing against immigration. And
do you know why the border's over there? Do you know why the border's over there? The border's over there because actually it was the ferry companies that wanted the border to be over there. So I understand that because it takes a big burden off the ferry companies. But Andrew, listen, we could talk all night. I thank you very much for your call. A staunch Remainer there. I get a delightful, I think rather good text here regarding Diane. At least it's a policy, more policy in one interview than Theresa May's whole campaign. What are you talking about? Strong and stable government, not a coalition of chaos. That's what it's all about. Now, I'm going to go to James in Geneva. James, you live in a country outside the European Union that quite often is threatened by the EU. How are they behaving towards the Brits?
Well, how is the EU behaving towards the Brits?
Yeah.
I think as expected. I mean, you know of all people that the EU would do their utmost to make the UK have a difficult exit. For all the political reasons we know, they're not going to make the Dutch and the French and any other country which is Eurosceptic make it look like a process which is easy. We'd be naive to think they're going to be reasonable to us. Being reasonable would just tempt other nations to go the same route. So this is what I expect to continue, for them to be hostile and aggressive and give us lousy terms. Because quite frankly, you know, even though you talk about on the trade, they'd be silly to shoot themselves in the foot. We've got to remember that the big trade deficit is spread over 27 countries. And so whilst
yeah, I get that, James. I get that, James. But we are still a big market, you know.
Yeah, but we're only about 8% of their business in terms of exports.
I tell you what, if you said to me as a car manufacturer or anything else, you could lose 8% of your business, I'd be terrified.
I agree with you. It is a lot, but this is a political decision, just like Brexit
Absolutely.
was a political decision. And
Absolutely.
that will outweigh the economic logic to some extent.
No, James, I understand that completely. I thank you for your call. And my final thought is summed up, actually, I think, by a text I've got here from Diane. She says, "Hi, Nigel. I voted Remain, but I am disgusted by the reported behaviour of the European Union. Could we just leave and refuse to pay any settlement costs?" Well, there is a Damascene conversion from a Remainer last time round. I think they're behaving appallingly. We shouldn't walk away just yet, but my goodness me, at some point we may have to be prepared to. Now, don't forget, there are 36 days to go until the general election. Plenty of time to make up your mind, to engage in the debate.